Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to The Messenger, a program offered by Tony Szalkiewicz, featuring messages of amazing things happening in the Catholic Church. Now here he is, Tony Szalkiewicz.
Good evening. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing good.
Well, tonight we have a guest speaker, special man, Gary Mullaney, and I'm going to give a little brief background of exactly who he is. Currently, he's president and CEO since 2007 of Attlebrook Incorporated in Attlebrook Community Services in Cromwell, Connecticut. Since 2006, Deputy Executive Director of Middlesex United Way in Middletown, Connecticut. 95 to 205, Chief Executive Officer for Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown, Connecticut. Superintendent in 1985 to 95, Norwich Hospital, Norwich, Connecticut. Superintendent in 78 to 85, Augusta Mental Health Institute in Augusta, Maine. Associate Commissioner 77 to 78, Mental Health and Corrections, Augusta, Maine. He was a warden of the Maine State Prison in Thomaston, Maine. Coordinating Superintendent 70 to 72, Vermont Department of Corrections, Montpelier. And he was an officer in 66 to 70, United States Marine Corps. And for that, Gary, I want to salute you for your service. We are brothers in arms. I was in the Army. His education is an A.B. College of Holy Cross, MHA, University of Connecticut, and advanced graduate studies at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, Department of Psychology, University of Vermont. He's got several recognitions: Liberty Bell Award in 2003, Distinguished Manager of the Year 93, State of Connecticut, the Silver Award for American Psychiatric Association 82, Augusta, Maine, Mental Health Institute. Citations from the mayor from the city of Middletown, Governor Weicker, and Rail of Connecticut. He's got several other things. He's affiliated with the Children's League of Nations, and president from 2012 to 14, Log Hill Estate Authority treasurer from 2007 to 2013, Middletown Rotary Club president, 2013 to 14. Middlesex Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, Middlesex Hospital Coordinator, Liberty Bank Coordinator, Marine Corps of the League Life Member, Healing of Racism Coalition, Middletown, and originator, the Warden Club, Boston, Massachusetts. Just to name a couple things. Gary, that's quite a background. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
So tonight, this program is really open. It's wide open because in the Catholic Church and other churches, you know, people have all kinds of gifts, and this is the type of program that I'm open to whatever the Holy Spirit directs you to do and to say. So there's no one set thing. It's just like whatever moves you to talk about, we're going to let you do it. And then we may have a couple questions, things that we may not understand. How's that sound?
Very good.
Okay, and why don't we start off with Attlebrook? What exactly is Attlebrook in Cromwell, Connecticut?
Well, Tony, I'm not correcting you, but Adel is a Swedish word for noble or dignity. And so we changed the name of our organization about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Adelbrook. Adel is a Swedish word, and we were once the Swedish orphanage, and we were founded in Cromwell about the turn of the last century by a pastor of what was then called the Swedish Covenant Church. And a lot of Swedes had come to Cromwell to work in the greenhouses that are still in the town of Cromwell. And in those days, at the late 1800s, early 1900s, the passage from Europe was a difficult one. And sometimes a parent or both parents would pass on the way to America. So this pastor by the name of Nelson purchased a house that is still on the West Street of Cromwell, actually across from the now Town Hall of Cromwell, a big house, and that was the first Swedish orphanage.
Oh, no kidding.
And it was actually a toss-up between here, Cromwell, and Worcester, Mass., where a lot of Swedes had gone to work for the steel mill in Worcester. And ironically, my grandfather was the superintendent of the steel mill in Worcester. And my father would talk about all the Swedish kids in his neighborhood. And they were probably members of the Covenant Church. So we have a long history, obviously, in Cromwell. In the early 20s, several farmers got together and either donated or purchased land that gave us a little over 100 acres. And today, on that 100 acres, one side of the hill is a ministry of the Church for Children, Edelbrook, and the other side of the hill is a ministry for seniors, the Covenant Retirement Community. So the Covenant
I didn't know that.
They have a big presence in the town of Cromwell.
Interesting. Wow. I didn't know. So on the ministry for the children, what exactly does that involve? Who basically participates in that? Well,
we were called, from about 1950, we were known as the Children's Home of Cromwell. And the agency had actually gone through a number of changes that reflected the social service situation in this country. As I said, originally we were an orphanage, and there were many orphanages, some run by the Catholic Church. There's one in New Britain called Klingberg that was run by Swedish Baptists. The Catholic Church had an orphanage in New Haven. I believe it was called St. Agnes. And basically to take care of the children of immigrants who had passed or who were working. And so the parent that was working would place the children in these homes during their work week and then take them home on their days off. And that happened through the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, the needs changed, and society changed. Where there was little divorce before World War II, now that became a new phenomenon, and there were kids who were either abandoned by one of their parents or who were in need of assistance because of a divorce. And so these orphanages became places for families of children. And they would come as whole families. 3 or 4 children of the same family would come to what was then called the Swedish orphanage, and then became the children's home. They came as families up and through the 1970s. In the 1970s, there was another social change. And this was caused by a Supreme Court decision called Galt. And in Galt, the Supreme Court said that children who had committed what were called status offenses could not be placed in reform schools with kids who had actually committed crimes. Now, status offenses are offenses that are particular to an age group, like smoking, truancy. So the beginnings of juvenile delinquency in the 70s, kids began to be separated. Those kids who committed status offenses went to places like the Children's Home of Cromwell, while kids who had committed crimes that would be considered felonies or misdemeanors as adults would be sent to Long Lane in the state of Connecticut. So there began to be a separation. And there were several places like the Children's Home of Cromwell. I mentioned Klingberg. The Catholic Church had an orphanage in Deep River called St. John.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And they went through the same metamorphosis. They began to take the same types of kids with these social problems, and then kids who had committed status offenses. And so these institutions around the state began to change. And it's ironic that in 1959, when I was in high school, that shows you how old I am, my first job was in such a residential program outside of Leicester, Mass, called Nazareth Home for Boys. And there, Catholic Charities and the Sisters of Mercy had converted an orphanage that took care of kids, 25 boys, who basically were status offenders or kids who had been abandoned by their parents, or boys that were emotionally disturbed. So this is the whole change in these types of organizations. So the Children's Home found itself like that through the 70s, into the 80s and 90s, and they began to get more and more difficult kids. The Children's Home has always been co-ed, and so they had, when I arrived in 2007, they had 70 beds, 50 for boys and 20 for girls, and the age range was 9 to 18.
Wow. That's a big range. How did you keep them separate?
Well, the actual building itself has different sections, and we one of the first things we did in 2008 was build a new section for girls, and so as I said, the children that were coming were much more difficult because the state had been very rigorous in terms of making decisions about kids who would come to residential programs. Children would be sent to foster care, in fact, several foster care homes, before they would be sent to a residential program under the sort of the rubric of what's known as least restrictive alternative. So residential was considered to be the strictest alternative.
Wow. So how many kids do you have there now?
Well, a little history on that. The state was focused under several commissioners. There have been 3 or 4 commissioners since I've been at Cromwell over the last 10 years, and each has had a focus on keeping children in the community. And we agree with that philosophy. Sometimes we disagree on how it's done, but we certainly agree that kids should be as close to their home communities as possible. What was happening during the late 2000s was that fewer and fewer referrals were coming to residential programs like ours. The first thing that happened was that the minimum age went from 9 to 13. And what I haven't said is that in Connecticut, institutions like ours are called by statute residential treatment facilities. In Massachusetts, the same type of facility is called a school. A residential treatment facility is a residence for the treatment of kids with emotional issues, and we have a school. In Massachusetts, it's the school first and the residence second. So there's a difference in how these programs were funded by the state, just given the difference in primary title between being a residential facility or an educational facility. But we had a school. So the 70 kids that were living with us in Cromwell went to school for the most part right next door in our special education school. Prior to 1970, these kids all went to public schools. They were types of kids. Yeah, they went to the schools in Cromwell, and before Cromwell had a high school, they went to Middletown High School. In fact, I had a neighbor who went to her junior prom with a boy from the children's home of Cromwell. So they were integrated both educationally and socially into the local schools. But as their individual issues became much more serious, in the 1970s, the need for a school became apparent. And so a school was built adjacent to the home, and the kids started to go to that school. So in about 2010, or I take that back, 2008, when the State Department of Children and Families said no more younger boys could come to the children's home, we took on an initiative of taking young boys, again 13 to 18, who had developmental disabilities. Wow. These particular boys were probably about half of them were in out-of-state facilities. They had been placed out of state. When I came to the children's home in 2007, I believe there were over 300 kids, Connecticut kids, who were placed in residential facilities for particular needs like developmental disabilities, like autism, and they were placed in mostly Massachusetts, but also in places like New York, Pennsylvania. We even had a child in Virginia. And so the state, rather than concentrating on a particular need, was sending kids out of state in order to be treated for those needs. There were actually several kids in Maine as well, and a couple in New Hampshire. So we started to take, very early on in 2008, 2009, we began to take boys back from their out-of-state placements, back to Cromwell. And about 2011, the State Department of Children and Families said that they had a need for a program for kids with autism. And so we brought in consultants from the University of Massachusetts in Worcester, and they helped us develop a program for kids with autism. And in July of that year, we opened a program for 8 boys, and that became sort of the core of what we are today. We began to take more and more kids with autism, and as we've decreased our number of beds, we've increased the professional services that we're able to offer to these boys and girls now who had to go out of state for these services prior to them being developed at Cromwell.
When you say they go out of state, doesn't the state has a legal liability to reimburse that state?
Yes, they do. And when they went out of state, when they because the out-of-state programs were basically schools, the school districts were paying a lot of the money for the kids to go out of state. That's sort of a shared expense that still occurs now. The kids come to us, and they're paid for, their residential is paid for by one of the state departments, mostly the Department of Children and Families, but we also have kids in Cromwell who have who are clients of the Department of Developmental Services, and occasionally we have kids who are on the high end of the autism spectrum, and they're paid for by the Department of Mental Health. So we have 3 state departments, and more individual school districts are paying for kids to be with us for their residential so that they can participate in our school programs.
Wow. Now, when you say you had this, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. When you say, I mean, the range, are they all on all in one class now? Is that they're all the same age?
We brought in boys, and but we had to rearrange our school. And as I said, our school had when we had 70 kids who lived with us, there were 70 kids in the school. You never saw us on the snow day scroll at the bottom of the TV because we never canceled school. The kids lived right next door. They only had to go to school. It was about a 30-yard walk, and they were in school. So we never canceled school, and we had very, very few day students. So that's totally changed now.
Yeah. Now, Gary, just let me add. In Durham, they had a school similar to that, right?
Well, they had a school in Durham that closed in about the first year that I was at Cromwell.
Right.
And it was specifically for boys who had developmental disabilities. And and the state created a program, a co-ed program, up in Pomfret for many of those kids. So that school in Durham closed, and then the state opened the following year, opened the program in Pomfret. That's still open.
Okay.
I think they serve there were about 60 kids who were served in Durham, and I think the program in Pomfret serves about 30 kids.
Yeah.
But the distinction is that while we took kids with developmental disabilities, the majority of kids that we started to take back then, this is now 2011, 2012, were kids with autism. So we began to change the characteristics of our population. We used to have kids who had juvenile justice issues or had emotional problems. Those kids were no longer part of our core at Cromwell. Those kids were now being placed in other facilities, and we were strictly a facility for kids with autism or developmental disabilities. And at the same time, we decreased our beds over the course of about 4 years from 70 beds to 35 beds. At the same time, we began to increase our number of day students. So we began to take kids from other school districts who needed a special place because of their autism. And I think our reputation, that's when we also at the same time, simultaneously, asked about what next for the boys that we were treating at the time. So we began a period of tremendous growth. The first thing we realized is that our school in Cromwell at that time had kids probably from 13 to 21. And we began to see that they all couldn't be in the same place. So almost in the same month, we purchased a building in Manchester, a former school of one of our of an agency that had to close. We purchased their 3-year-old school building, and we began to take kids between the ages of 3 and 10 with autism or severe behavioral problems.
Wow!
And today, that school has about 25 kids every day. Then we also realized that kids 18 to 21 needed vocational programming, and so we opened up a transition academy in South Main Street in Middletown in what was a storefront. And the kids would go to school, the 18 to 20-year-old kids would go, we had 10 of them, would start there in the morning, get a couple of hours of school, and then they would take the city bus, the Middletown city bus, and they would cross the city, and they would work in places like Walgreens, CVS, Marshalls, the YMCA, and they would work with a job coach for the rest of the school day.
Okay, these job coaches, you provided them, right?
Right, and the school districts are the payors. They pay us to educate these day students, and so now we had a full spectrum of educational programming from age 3 to age 21 for kids on the autism spectrum.
Wow.
A year later, the program, we saw the need to because autism is a spectrum, we have high-functioning kids whose IQs are probably higher than yours and mine combined, Tony.
I have a nephew like that.
Yeah, and
he's
then
high function autism, brilliant.
Yeah, right.
It's certain areas. Go ahead.
He probably has social problems. He probably has a difficult time making friends, and has difficulty with social interactions. Well, those are the kids that were in our storefront school. Some of them worked at Wesleyan Potters, and as I said, these other commercial places. But we also saw a need for the 18 to 21-year-olds who were less able, and so some of them didn't talk. Others of them had behavioral issues. So we rented a place in Middletown, in the Riverview Center, right in the middle of downtown Middletown, and we renovated about 8,000 square feet. And we have our second transitional academy for kids who are less able, and those kids go to work in groups. So they go to group, they work in different places, but there might be 4 kids to a work site with 4 job coaches. So they have sort of individualized job coaches. And we're still
my daughter works for the state, I think it's Department of Mental Health too, and she's a caseworker. She works with clients all the time, very similar to what you're saying, you know. Probably different degrees. I don't know exactly what that is, but
well, we have 3 boys who are clients of the Department of Mental Health, and they're in our transitional academy because they're on individual education plans, IEPs, until they're 21. So these transitional academies help to fulfill that requirement of the state and responsibility of the school district to provide these children with either emotional disabilities or with autism or developmental disabilities, an educational program until they're 21. So this past June, our lease ran out on our first transitional academy, and our director had a brilliant idea of starting a business where the kids could interact with the public. So in November, after 3 months of renovation, we took over what had been a very central ice cream parlor in Middletown, right next to the police station and right behind a fabulous restaurant that draws a lot of people, and we opened what's called the Barkery. And it's a place where our kids make dog biscuits.
No kidding.
They sell them to the public.
I used to get ice cream there. I know where you're talking.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now you could get dog biscuits for your favorite friend,
I can't tell my wife; she'll be feeding me them.
Well, there you go. I hope she's listening.
No, I hope not. I don't want to give her any ideas.
Yeah, we take anybody's money. So the director, we have, I think, 10 or 11 kids who work there. At the same time, they also go to these other job sites throughout the day with their job coaches, and they then when they're not in the actual off-site community work program, they work at the Barkery. And it's a great thing for kids with autism.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Because when the customers come in, the kids, as salespeople, have the ability to talk about something that's apparent. In other words, someone walks into a Barkery, they want dog biscuits. That's why they're there. So the kids are able to talk about the dog. Do you have, what's your dog? What's the dog's name? And we try and teach them to get good eye contact. Eye contact in our business is probably case 1. You have to get our kids to look you in the eye. Autism can take many forms, but one of the basic throughout this whole spectrum of autism is the fact that kids need to develop social skills. So getting good eye contact is primary. So
that's critical with any vocation.
Exactly.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so some days we have a crowd. It's only open from 10 to 2, basically school hours, but the kids have 5 or 6 different recipes, and each recipe had to be approved by the Department of Agriculture. and they make them in a couple of different sizes for big dogs and tiny dogs, and they really enjoy the interaction that they have with the public. They run the cash register, but they do everything from start to finish. They go shopping for the raw material, and then they make the biscuits. They bake them, and then they display them. And if you went there, Tony, you'd see that they're displayed like cupcakes would be in a bakery. In fact, people can go to our website, Adelbrook, ADEL Brook.org, and there's a banner that goes across our website, and you just click on that banner, and there's an interview done by a Catholic news program that shows on Sundays, I believe, and there's a short clip, about a 5-minute clip, that shows this whole operation with our kids, with our older kids.
That's awesome. That's awesome. How does it affect them emotionally? They take pride in that?
Oh, they definitely take pride in it. They wear a little uniform. They have aprons and they have shirts. So there's there's a great feeling, and a couple of the kids we've had some major issues in other school settings, really have come a long way in being able to focus on the task at hand in this store. They just love the store so much that they just want to be a part of it. And they're good.
Yeah, go ahead.
They're good corporate citizens too. Recently, they donated things to the Chamber of Commerce for the Chamber of Commerce's golf tournament. They take on the weekends. We're open, by the way, on Monday through Saturday, but they also on Fridays they take the extra dog biscuits to the fire station or to the police station for them to use with their pet animals or to basically give to people with pets. So we take them to veterinary hospitals as well and to animal shelters. So the kids have a sense of this is their business. And on July 1st, we'll have new software and be able to do online ordering as well. I was going to mention that. That's great. Are you kidding? We're not in it to make a lot of money. We're just in it to give the kids the experience of working with the public. And these are fresh biscuits, so they're like fresh bread. They're not like something you might buy in a pet store that could have been made 6 months ago. These biscuits are like a loaf of fresh bread, so you have to use them within 4 or 5 days. So that means that if people like them, and from what we understand, the dogs really like them, that would mean that person would, frequent the shop over and over again. So it's win-win for these kids and a real success. We're real happy with what's happened.
Wow, that sounds great. Are you kidding? Yeah, I think my experience working with youth is that it's one thing to have them do things. It's another thing to empower them to do that. Empowering it goes a long way, as I found.
Exactly. So, and our work program starts actually in our grammar school, or kids who are in 11, 12, 13. They start to get little jobs, first in the facility itself, then on campus, and then they too have work sites in the community. This is from our school in Cromwell and our school in East Hartford. We actually have 5 school locations.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, the two transitional academies are in Middletown, in the Riverview Center, right in the middle of town. And then I mentioned the fact that we have a school for 3 to 10-year-olds. Actually, it'll be increasing 3 to 11-year-olds in Manchester. And then we have the big school in Cromwell with 80 kids. And then we have a school with 25 kids in East Hartford. And that's in a former Catholic school, St. Rose Catholic School, but it's now Edelbrook, the Learning Center, East Hartford. And that school is for kids who have emotional problems, not kids with autism.
Right.
We would take kids with autism there as well. I mean, right now we would take kids with, but the predominant need in East Hartford is for kids with emotional issues. So they're basically high school kids. They're basically about 12 to 17, and that's a year-round school. All of our schools are year-round, so that kids get a couple of weeks vacation between the end of school and the beginning of summer school. But we have a 7-week summer school program, and at all of our schools as well. So one of the things that we learned is that autism needs constant and consistent treatment.
Yeah.
So by constant, I mean it can't be simply once a week. It has to be constant. It has to be in everything that the kids do. And then by consistent, it means it has to follow the same treatment plan or behavioral plan. So when the demand for our services was increasing, we had to answer the question, what next? So we operate 12 programs called community residential supports. And these are 3-person homes, and they run basically along Route 84 from Waterbury, Southbury, all the way up to Bloomfield, 12 homes. And we have young children. We had boys that were 9 when we actually placed them in one of our homes. And they're now, I think, they're probably 12 or 13. They've lived with us 3 years in the community. And many of them, 12 kids go to school, 9 of them go to our schools. Of the 30 kids or 36 kids who live in these residential programs. The state also allowed that we could do this same type of home for kids who would otherwise be in our Cromwell facility. So in Middletown, we have 2 homes that we lease, and each has 3 boys in it. So we have, when you look at the whole program, there are 14 children from ages now, I'm thinking probably the lowest age now is about 12, all the way up to, I think we have 1 boy who's 29, but outside of that 1 boy, I think the oldest is 23. So there's 1 outlier, but mostly this was to answer the question, what next? And so the kids graduate from our program in Cromwell, and they go to these 3-bed homes. Some of them come back to our schools, and others of them go to community programs run by other community agencies funded by the Department of Developmental Services.
Okay. How does the recent budget impact all that now?
Well, we probably aren't going to grow much more in our residential programs because of the state budget, but because we are working with kids with autism, and because I believe our reputation would be that we take kids with significant behavioral issues and individual issues like kids who don't talk, I think our services are very much in demand. And we're actually beginning to see a demand from out of state. And as I said, not only does the state place kids with us, but the individual school districts. We just took a child from Stanford, for example, and the school district is paying for the child to live with us in Cromwell, so that the child doesn't have to make an hour and a half round trip.
Right.
We have one child who actually comes out from the Danbury area, and that child stays in we have an after-school program, and so they're with us from 8:30 in the morning till 6 at night, 5 days a week.
Wow.
That particular school district buses back and forth to that child's home. And that was part of the state budget. The state would not pay for that child to live with us, and the school district felt it was better for her to go back and forth to home. So that child travels a lot. But we now from just being in Cromwell, and when I got there, and we had 2 group homes that were off campus. We have a group home in Cromwell that's adjacent to our campus, and then we have a group home in Middletown and another one in North Haven, and these are for girls with emotional problems. We had those 3 sites, and we had the Cromwell site, and that was it. So we changed our name. Part of it was that we were no longer dealing with just children. We were dealing with young adults, and as they grow, obviously, and age, we'll follow them, and we'll be their forever homes. We began to recognize that the children's home of Cromwell just didn't fit. We looked for a rebranding, and 6 years ago we started the process. And as I said, edel is a Swedish word, so that ties us to our Swedish heritage. And it means precious or dignified. And then brook is the English word that the force of nature that's always changing, ever moving. So edel brook. And and so now we're in, I think, 23 or 24 locations across the state.
Now, when you say you have the group homes that occupy, you said like 3 students, is that supervised? How does that work?
Yes. Yeah, that basically is supervised based on the needs of the 3 people who are in the home. So some of our homes are staffed with 5 individuals on every shift, 5 staff for 3 people. And others of our home are staffed with just 1 person for 3 people. So it's based on the level of need.
Yeah. And what type of supervision do they get? What is the requirement for that? They have to have a bachelor's degree, or?
Well, in some of our programs that's required. In some of our programs, 60 college credits are required. And in the homes, these community residential supports, a high school degree is required. And unfortunately, based on insurance, we have 2 types of employees. Some, because of our insurance, that people 25 and over are able to drive. People 25 and under can't. And so we have a mix of staffing levels in each home. But for the most part, they're mature adults that go through a pretty extensive initial program of training with us. And some of them never had experience working with kids before. Others have worked in other agencies and have come to us because they want to focus on working with kids with autism. And others come to us because of the location. We have places in Bloomfield. We have places, as I said, in Southbury. So sometimes it's the location that attracts people, and they want to work closer to their own homes, and they find that we're a social service agency in that area, and they come to work with us. But our homes are different because we support them with what are called behaviorists. These are this is a new profession. I was in the mental health field. I ran mental hospitals for 27 years, and the only behaviorists we ever had were consultants. We never had them on staff.
Well, I know my wife was under you. My wife worked under you.
Yeah,
why you never committed her is beyond me.
Well, she was putting up with you, Tony. You would have to take two people.
Bob, you didn't hear this. Oh, that is funny.
I heard it.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, there's a witness.
So she was actually doing the state a favor.
Gary, she loved her job. She really loves working with people like that. I mean, that's such a, I give you credit. And by the grace of God, so go you. Because, that is a special, special calling. And I really commend you for doing that. And it sounds
Tony, like
you really did a lot with it.
Tony, I went to, as you mentioned, I went to Holy Cross, and we had a Jesuit that used to end every class with a slogan that said, "Do justice. Do justice."
Yeah.
Do justice. And back then, we were all men, so it was probably "Do justice, gentlemen." And what he was trying to say was, whatever profession you went in, you have an ethical responsibility, and because you have this education, now you have a moral responsibility. So
Amen to that.
Every single one of my jobs, I went, as I said, I worked at this boys' home while I was in my junior and senior year in high school, and then 4 years in college. And then in the Marine Corps, my last duty station was as the guard officer at the Naval Disciplinary Command in Portsmouth. So for some reason, I got placed back with basically young men who had the same problems as the kids that I had when I was working at the boys' home. And they evidenced it in going AWOL or doing things against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But they were the same kids. And then I stayed in corrections in Vermont. And when I was 27, I was named the warden of the Maine State Prison. And that was a maximum security prison. And I think when I got there, we had 16 men doing life. And we only had a population then about 350. But you could see what the social causes were then. Many of the guys had been abused as kids. They still carried the marks of their physical abuse. So if you could see the marks of physical abuse, how many of them had been mentally abused, psychologically abused?
Karen mentioned that more than once.
Yeah. And so from there, I went to be the associate commissioner of a department that had corrections, and that's sort of how I got the job. But I also learned about mental health and at that time it was called mental retardation, now developmental disabilities. So I had a great view of what the service system looked like. And I've used all of those experiences as I've moved from job to job. Obviously, when I came to Connecticut Valley Hospital, having Whiting as a maximum security facility was not something that was foreign to me. I'd been a warden of a maximum security facility, so I understood how you needed and would be able to do treatment while still being assuring for the public safety. So I had some great experiences, and I think that they've led me to the Children's Home and now Edelbrook, and I think that the culmination of those experiences has assisted in our growth. I see a clear path for the agency going forward. There certainly is a need for our services, not only within Connecticut, but as time goes on, I see us providing services for kids from out of state that simply because of the special services and the special interdisciplinary process that we use, between psychiatry, social work, psychology, the behaviorists that I talked about, occupational therapists, the nurses that we have, and that all, the special education teachers that we have. We have a really extensive and credentialed staff complement that continually works on gaining the abilities to meet the needs of the kids we serve. So I'm in a phenomenal catbird seat, if you will, to see that Connecticut has a service that's unique in meeting the needs of children and young adults with autism.
Wow. I'm thoroughly convinced, that we have predestined not only goals, but predestined journeys to be someplace and do things that, God wants us to do. And He nudges us along. You probably have felt that because, like I said before, this is such a gift to these, not only to the children, for the community, and for the whole, because, I know how difficult that could be. Autism is extremely, extremely difficult. And there's the high function autist, like my nephew, who really knows that they have autism. And that's very difficult because they see their twin cousins, growing up and getting married and having kids, and he's not part of that. But he knows that. But yet, through education and through training and nourishment and being with others, it really helps them, and guides them. And for you to do that, that's very, very, it's excellent, excellent. And you're blessed by doing that. That's a very
Tony, we're out of time.
Okay.
We're out of time, Tony.
Thank you, Gary.
You're very welcome. Do justice.
Amen.
We've been listening to The Messenger with Tony Szalkiewicz. We'll be back with another interesting program next week, same time, same station. In the meantime, may God bless each and every one of you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen, and God bless. Thank you, Gary.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.